like a whole bunch of stuff. I really cool.
Oh, you can hold it?
No, I didn't buy anything. I know what they're doing. I spent a bunch.
At least from me today and on this trip. We did talk about him. We saw a short video in class. I'd recommend you watch it again. I think it was about 7 or 8 minutes long, but it has lots of facts in it. It's about the forgotten assassination of this guy, James Abrams Garfield, another Civil War general. Garfield was elected in 1880. He becomes president on March 4th, 1881. And in the summer of that year, he will be shot in the back in Washington, D.C. at this train depot, not too far from the Capitol building. And of course, it's been torn down since then. He is shot by this guy, Charles Guiteau. Charles Guiteau was an aspiring office seeker. He was angry because he didn't get an appointment from the Garfield administration, even though he had helped get Garfield elected, at least that's what he said. And he was basically deranged. He waits there in that train station near the Capitol for Garfield to come in that morning. Garfield was accompanied by his Secretary of State, a fellow by the name of Robert Todd Lincoln. I've already mentioned that, was with him. And Garfield will be shot but not immediately killed. The one thing I wanted to mention to you is that Garfield was lying in agony for many, many weeks following the shot in his back. The White House that summer was so hot that the inventor came in and said, I've got something to cool it off. And basically, even in 1881, we have the first example of air conditioning in the United States. In 1881, air conditioning. And it was in the White House. The other thing about this picture is that his doctors were incompetent. They didn't know what they were doing. And basically, when they probed around to try to find the bolt to take it out of Garfield, they never could find it. And they were all sticking their fingers in there, and they didn't know enough to wash their hands and everything else. And Garfield probably died of the actions of his doctors rather than of the gunshot wound itself. He probably died of infection. The President of the United States. The Vice President will take over. His name was Chester Alan Arthur from New York City, actually Chester Alan Arthur. The thing I wanted to show to you in Washington, D.C. is that there is no marker marking the spot where Garfield was assassinated. When the old train depot was still up, it was the Western Maryland and the Ohio Railroad. They did put a plaque in there, and the customers at that railroad, after a number of months, made them take it out because they said it was too depressing to look at that every day when they traveled in Washington, D.C. or coming to and fro. So no marker was ever put up at the spot. Where was that depot? It was located where the National Gallery of Art is located right now. Just down the street from the Natural History Museum that some of you went to where you saw the whale and the giant elephant or the mastodon or whatever. So it's just down that same street. In fact, it's almost down there at 7th Street where we turned the corner to park that first day when we dropped down to the American History Museum. However, you can tell that near the Capitol building itself, the southwest corner of the Capitol building, there is a fairly nice statue in commemoration of President James A. Garfield. And that's what it looks like. I've seen it many times there. But nothing to commemorate his assassination. You know, if you go to Dallas, you'll see a lot of Kennedy. If you go to Buffalo, New York, you'll see stuff of the McKinley assassination. Of course, there's a lot in Washington of the Lincoln assassination, as we know, but nothing on Garfield. And with that, are there any questions?
When was that statue erected?
That's a good question. I would have to look that up, George. I don't know. You know, it looks like it was, it's Victorian, and I'll bet you it was erected probably in the early 20th century. So it's a Garfield statue in Washington, D.C. You might be able to find it there with your phone.
Of course, none of these other buildings were here. rear entrance to Ford's Theater. It had been a church. In 1863, as I said, the Ford brothers bought it. They converted it into a theater. Lincoln had attended many times. Now, we know from watching the movie and from other things you saw today that what was the original plan of Booth and the other conspirators? Kidnapping. That fell through because on April 9, 1865, Lee surrenders to Granite Appomattox, and now it is Easter week. On Thursday night of that week, on Wednesday night of that week, Lincoln gives a speech at the White House because he's called out by the people that are on the White House lawn. Back then, anybody could just walk up to the White House. Big crowd gathers. They're celebrating in Washington. Fireworks. Lincoln gives a speech. And during that speech, which was basically kind of unprepared, although he was reading a few remarks that he had read, and apparently his little son, 11-year-old Tad, was down at his knee. The people in the crowd couldn't see him because Lincoln's on the second floor, talking to the crowd there. It's after dark, and of course torchlights are lit. And at one point, Lincoln said, "I believe that now that this war is over, we should give some of the more intelligent freed slaves the right to vote." Well, there was an actor in the crowd that night who was very angry that his beloved South had lost the war, that Lee had surrendered. And he says this is John Wilkes Booth, and he says to his partner who's standing there with him, Lewis Payne or Lewis Powell, we saw him in the movie, the guy that was supposed to dig the ditch for Mrs. Surratt, the guy who stabbed Secretary of State William Seward. He's standing there with Booth, and Booth says, "You know what that means? That now means N-word citizenship. Now I'll put him through, by God." That's the first indication we had that Booth ever thought about killing Lincoln. It was like 2 nights before he actually killed him. When was Booth going to kill Lincoln? Booth is an actor. He wants anything he does, kidnapping, killing, anything. He wants it to be theatrical. He wants it to be dramatic. Well, time is going by. We get through Thursday, and on Friday morning, John Wilkes Booth, who's staying at the old National Hotel where the museum is now on Pennsylvania Avenue, comes up here to Ford's Theater early that morning, about 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock. He finds out from the Ford brothers who say, "Hey, you know, the old man's coming to the theater tonight." Booth says, "You mean Lincoln?" He says, "Yeah." Booth didn't know that was going to happen. The Lincolns had made arrangements to attend the play that night. It was Good Friday. The Lincolns were going to bring General Grant and his wife Julia. Mrs. Grant could not stand Mrs. Lincoln. She didn't want to ever socialize with her. The Grants had the excuse they're going to go to New Jersey by train to visit Grant's children. So the Lincolns look around for somebody else to accompany them to the theater that night. Lincoln himself didn't want to come. But he went on a carriage ride earlier that Friday, Good Friday, with his wife, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was very cordial, and things seemed pretty calm. And Lincoln, you know, was kind of acquiescing to going to the theater, would please his wife. You know, good wife, good life, or happy wife, happy life, right?
Right.
So they make arrangements with Major Charles Rathbone and Clara Harris, who was the daughter of a United States Senator from New York. During that day, Lincoln does some things like I said. He signed the legislation that created the Secret Service, which later on would be the agency that protects the president. And he also pardoned a few soldiers who were condemned to death. All this is on that day. Now, Lincoln finishes his business at the White House, but it's later in the afternoon, it's in the evening, and as a result, the Lincolns don't really get into their carriage about 8 o'clock to go pick up Major Rathbone and Clara Harris. When they finally pick them up here in Washington, a few blocks from the White House, and they make it down here, the play, Our American Cousin, has already started. Meantime, during the day, you saw some of the preparations that Booth made. When he found out the Lincolns were going to be here, he knew this whole theater. Everybody in the theater knew him because he's one of the most famous actors in America. And nobody thought anything of it. He went up to the box where the Lincolns are going to be, and there were workmen up there putting the flag bunting that you saw, and you saw the actual flag, and getting the rocking chair for Lincoln, which is now at Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, and getting the box all set. Well, Booth was able to sneak up there after breaking off a wooden part of a music stand, and he puts that in the dark up there in the little hallway between 2 doorways leading into Lincoln's box. Booth is going to use that piece of wood later on. You saw it in there. How many of you saw that piece of wood I'm talking about? Okay. Some historians, and up until probably 10 years ago, they thought that the hole in that inner door at Peephole was drilled by Booth that morning. That's what I had always read. And starting about 10 years ago, historians are questioning that now. They think that may have already been in the door, but it was how convenient for Booth. Because when the Lincolns arrive here at the theater at 8:30 at night, of course, around in the front, and I'll tell you why we're in the back in a few minutes. They arrive around in the front, they get off, they go up the stairway, up to that dress circle where we were all sitting earlier, inside the theater. They walk around the back, The actors on the stage, especially Laura Keene, the main actress in Our American Cousin, she loves Lincoln and she notices him and she stops and starts applauding. Well, at that point, everybody had the signal there's something going on in the back of the theater. They turn around, there's President Lincoln and his wife, accompanied by an Army major and his fiance. And the band starts to strike Hail to the Chief. You saw the violin and the drumsticks in there for that. And they walked over to the exact same doorway that Booth will later go through, in the inner doorway, and they sit in their box to wild applause. There are 1,700 people in the theater that night. The Ford brothers are beaming. Why? Traditionally, Good Friday is a bad night for people to attend a play. Back then, people were more religious, and they just thought it just wasn't right to go to a play. And plays back then, and actors, they were all considered to be pretty low class. So Ford brothers are very happy to have a full house that night. Eventually, they get back to the play. But it's the middle of the first act, so the Lincolns don't even see the whole play. In the meantime, Booth has now made plans to have his compatriot, fellow conspirator, Lewis Payne and Davy Harold are going to go to near the White House in Lafayette Square. We're going to see that on Tuesday morning before we leave, because there's another crime that was committed there. And they go to the house of William Seward, and you saw that in the movie. They start stabbing Seward in the bed. Why wasn't Seward killed by this big guy, Lewis Payne? Because Seward had a horse or had a carriage accident, was wearing a brace on his neck, and that saved his life. Seward will be scarred for the rest of his life. You've all heard of William Seward. He survives this assassination attempt. 2 years later, in 1867, it's William Seward, the Secretary of State, who buys what from Russia? Alaska. And everybody said, what are you doing buying that? It's just frozen tundra. And they even called it Seward's Folly. I don't even remember hearing about Seward's Folly. So this is the same William Seward. Lincoln also had sent George Atzerodt to the National Hotel to kill the vice president. Well, you saw Atzerodt in the movie. What did he do? He sat in the bar and drank and got too drunk and he chickened out. But he will later on be hanged for being part of the murder conspiracy. Okay? The people that were involved in the kidnapping conspiracy, which would have been Michael O'Loughlin and Samuel Arnold from Baltimore, they will only get prison sentences afterwards. So we've got these 4 people here now that are involved either in actual crimes or in the accessories before or after the fact, or as accomplices, I should have said. It would be Booth, actually 5, Booth, Mary Surratt, Edmund Spangler, who is the doorkeeper here, or is the stagehand here, Davy Harold, and George Atzerodt. Okay, out of all those, everybody but Spangler will be executed after the assassination is over. Anyway, Booth now arrives at the theater. It actually arrives back here about 10 o'clock at night. I'm sorry, about 9 o'clock at night. He knows this play backward and forward. He does not want to shoot Lincoln until the right part of the play, when the biggest laugh will be going on. Not as irony, but because he knows that will help muffle the sound of the gunshot. So Booth arrives here, and he knocks on this back door over here, and Edmund Spangler, the stagehand, comes to the door, and Spangler says, what do you want? I'm busy, I got to move scenery. And Booth says, well, I want to come in, and I want you to hold my horse. And Spangler says, I can't hold your horse, and you can't go across the stage, there's a scene going on. So they get a young boy, about 12 years old, a fellow by the name of John Burroughs. He's better known as John Peanuts, or Peanut John, because guess what his job was here at the theater? He sold peanuts. So Peanuts John will hold on to Booth's horse for over an hour out here. Meantime, Booth now will sneak down into the theater. He knows the theater, goes down the stairs underneath the theater into the very basement we were in the museum. He goes to a little alcove here between this building and the building next door, which is still there, called the Star Saloon. And he goes over there and has a drink, and then he goes and gets his horse. That's at a livery stable just down the street here on 10th Street. There's a great photograph of that livery stable in some history books. Booth now, excuse me, he had done that earlier and brought his horse back over here. Booth now will come back into the theater from the front. Okay. Now, while Booth is over there in the Star Saloon, this is where I got mixed up, he's having a bourbon, trying to probably get up his nerve or whatever, and biding his time. And a couple of people notice him there. Now, John Wilkes Booth was from a famous acting family known as the Mad Booths of Maryland. Their father, Junius Brutus Booth, was considered to be the greatest actor in American history. His brother, Edwin Booth, was considered to be one of the great actors of America. John Wilkes Booth, not quite so much. And Booth probably always resented that. Well, while he's over there having this bourbon, a couple of guys see him in the bar and they say, "Hey, aren't you Booth?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "You know something, Booth? You'll never be the actor your father was." At which point John Wilkes Booth says to him, "Gentlemen, I guarantee that when I leave the stage for the last time, I will be the most famous man in America." You see the, I don't know the irony in that, but the irony is the right word, but he knows he's going to be leaving the stage for the last time in just a few moments. Booth then will go through the front door of the theater. His horse is back here. He goes up the stairways around that same dress circle. A few people said that, witnesses said they noticed him, but they didn't think anything of it. He said, "You know, John Wilkes Booth." Booth will go up to Lincoln's footman, or basically butler, and talk to him for a second and give him one of his calling cards, and the footman allows him into the booth. You notice no guards for Lincoln. Lincoln had a guard, but his guard was off over that same saloon, the Star Saloon next door, having a drink. At about 10:15, Harry Hawk, the only actor on the stage, will be responding to his fiance's mother, who had just put him down. He's over visiting in England. That's why our American cousin. He's over visiting, and she says, "You know, you don't know anything about society." And as she's leaving the stage, he's out there by himself saying, "Oh yeah, I don't know the manners of good society, old gal? Well, I know enough to turn you inside out, you sockdologizing old man-trap." Well, the word man-trap really is a funny kind of a line. You know, what's a man-trap? Obviously, somebody that seduces men. And the whole audience starts to laugh like crazy. That was Booth's opportunity now to shoot Lincoln. And he sneaks up behind Lincoln. Lincoln was sitting in the theater. Here's the stage down here from where I am. I'm Lincoln now. And at that moment, he had turned and looked over in this direction into the audience. Some people say he saw General Ambrose Burnside. You remember I mentioned Burnside? Sideburns, Battle of Fredericksburg? He saw General Burnside was looking at him. And therefore, Lincoln's head was turned this way. So when Booth walked in from this direction, if Lincoln had been watching the stage actors, Lincoln's head would have been turned this way, would have gotten shot here. Instead, he gets shot behind the left ear, and the bullet, the trajectory will take it up behind his right eye. And people in the audience at first did not understand. Some people said later on they thought it was part of the play. Other people said they just couldn't process it. What's going on? They saw this blue-gray smoke wafting around. Of course, General Rathbone jumps up now and is struggling with Booth up there, and Booth slashes him with a Bowie knife after Booth threw away that derringer he had. Why would Booth throw that gun away? It only gets one shot, so it's useless. But now he's got this huge Bowie knife. He slashes at Major Rathbone, cuts him in the left arm all the way down to the bone, so that's going to bleed quite a bit. So Rathbone is incapacitated. Booth now will vault over the railing onto the stage. You saw how high it was? That's 12 feet. Now, Booth is 26 years old. He's very athletic. He had been playing a lot of Shakespearean plays, and one of the things people said he was good at was the physical parts of the play, the athletic parts of the various plays he was in. But when Booth jumps down, supposedly he catches his spur into that bunting or gonfalon or flag, that very same flag we saw there, and it snaps his left leg back, so when he hits the stage, it somehow causes him to break his left fibula. Now, I will tell you this. I and some other historians, but I don't say I'm an historian, I'm a history teacher, but some people I know, and more recently some historians think that maybe Booth did not break his leg when he jumped to the stage. And I want to ask you if this is possible. And because we've been talking about evidence, right? And can we raise reasonable doubt? The only reason we know that Booth broke his leg jumping onto that stage is because that's what he wrote in his own diary as he's on his escape. Can you believe anything he writes in his own diary? Is it possible that Booth actually broke his leg while he's trying to ride his horse out of town and he messed up riding and fell off his horse? Would he write that in his diary? Well, later on, like an idiot, I fell off my horse. So some historians are now doubting whether or not Booth broke his leg jumping to that stage. Because eyewitnesses said he went across that stage with that bloody knife in his hand, and when he got to the center, he yelled, "Sic semper tyrannis." Such be it to all tyrants. State motto of the state of Virginia. Okay, now Lincoln is mortally wounded up there. Mrs. Lincoln, by this time, is screaming, and now the people are going, "What's going on?" And there was pandemonium in that theater with 1,700 people. Nobody knew what to do. They were like they were paralyzed. Booth will actually run across the stage, come past what they call the green room, the actor's waiting room. Some of you who've been in acting know about that. And he comes out this very door here, and he now will kick Peanuts John and grab his horse
They said in there that he hit him with the butt of the boot
Okay, he could have done that.
to knock him out of the way.
They grabbed the reins of his horse. One gentleman actually had gotten up on the stage because Rathbone was saying, "Get that man!" One gentleman ran all the way down here in the alleyway. I think they showed that in the movie, didn't they?
Yeah.
Okay, and Booth was able to kick him away. Booth will now get on his horse, ride down what is called Baptist Alley. Again, dirt out here. He turns left, where we walk down, right there, exactly there. When he gets out to the corner, he now will make a right turn and go down F Street. He continues going down to Pennsylvania Avenue. He gets there, he crosses over right in front of the United States Capitol building and makes his way to where the Navy Yard Bridge was. There, Booth will be stopped by the guards because it's after 9 o'clock at night and nobody's allowed in or out of town. It's wartime, right? Although the war is basically over, but still they're under a lot of security here. Booth gets there and he's very calm and he says, "Yeah, my name's Booth and I was visiting a girlfriend here in the city and now I have to get home." And the guard believed him. Well, why didn't the guard look at his Twitter account or tweets or whatever? Okay, so again, communication was not around. Nobody knew, that Lincoln had just been shot by Booth. Now, it wasn't long after Booth escaped that immediately, who was that? And everybody was saying it was Booth, the actor. And so they knew that that's who they're looking for. Booth will make his way across that Navy Yard Bridge, and he'll get up to a place called Soper's Hill. We will be going there shortly after lunch. You won't be able to recognize what Booth saw because now it's all built up as strip malls and all kinds of crap. But that's Soper's Hill, where he will meet up, prearranged with Davy Harold. He was supposed to meet up with Davy Harold and Louis Payne, the guy who stabbed Seward. But Payne, when he got done stabbing Seward, he went nuts, and he comes out of the house and he throws the knife away and yells, "I'm mad, I'm mad." And he goes and sits all night in the cemetery because he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know anybody in the city except Mrs. Surratt. Davy Harold is scared. He takes off with both horses. But he's supposed to meet Booth up there on Soper's Hill across the Potomac. And about midnight, Booth gets up there and Davy Harold is already there. And they meet together and they ride on. By that time, Booth's leg is hurting, and we know it's broken by that time. And Booth says, "I need help." Well, first thing they do is they go to the Surround Tavern where we're going to go. Where supposedly Mary Surratt, and I believe that she did, go there earlier that day and give off the package that had the binoculars in it. And I think that she was involved with the hiding of the shooting irons, as they say. And we'll hear more about this when we get there this afternoon, but I wanted to bring it up to that point. So very quickly, because I know you're hungry and you want to move on. Shortly after visiting the Surround Tavern, and they were only there for a little while, they got some whiskey and they talked to John Lloyd, who was probably drunk at the time anyway, and they will take off. And they will now head down to Dr. Samuel Mudd's house, where they will knock on the door. Mudd comes to the door. Mudd claims, "I didn't recognize him," blah, 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 blah. Mudd just months earlier had negotiated with Booth to buy a horse, or Booth had negotiated with Mudd to buy a horse. They knew each other. Mudd was a Confederate agent, Booth was a Confederate agent, they all knew each other. But Mudd will deny it, and that's one of the reasons he gets sent to prison. It's there that Booth will stay overnight and have his leg sent by Dr. Mudd. You saw the boot that they actually had to cut off because you couldn't take the boot off because the leg was so swollen it would hurt the fracture even more. Booth will then leave Dr. Mudd's house. By this time, they've got thousands of people out looking for John Wilkes Booth because they know it's him, and there's a $100,000 reward. Today, that $100,000 would be worth maybe $5 million. You're going to be out looking and trying to get a piece of that $5 million, right? Booth will be on the run for 12 days after the assassination. Meantime, on April the 15th at 7:22 in the morning, in the room that you were at, Abraham Lincoln will die. Secretary of War Edward Stanton says now he belongs to the angels. Mr. Ellis said now he belongs to the angels. Eyewitnesses actually did not hear Edward Stanton say either one of those things. But historians today are now saying, he probably said now he belongs to the angels. And about 25 years later, he changed it to, oh no, I said now he belongs to the angels. Because doesn't that sound better? He belongs to all of us. We're the angels, right? Rather than the angels. So that's controversial also. So Lincoln is dead. Booth gets down further into Maryland. He wants to get across the Potomac into Virginia. He eventually will, but not very far, about 10 miles into Virginia. The whole time Booth is hiding. He's getting help from some Confederate agents down there in Maryland. Most don't want to help him though, like Mrs. Quisenberry, because they know that they will get in trouble. Booth asked for newspapers while he's in hiding, and he's horrified to read. Even in the southern newspapers, it's vilifying Booth as what a horrible, dastardly, cowardly act he did. The Richmond newspaper, the Confederate capital's newspaper, said, "We fear that John Wilkes Booth, in the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln, has killed the best friend the South ever had." And we know this, that had Lincoln lived, the South would have been treated a lot differently than it was when the radical Republicans came in after Lincoln's death. Booth will be cornered at a tobacco farm down in Virginia, Garrett's Farm, on April 26, 1865. They will surround him in a barn. They start the barn on fire. Tobacco barns are barns that purposely have lots of room between the slats of the barn to let air in to dry the tobacco. So when they start a fire, you could easily look through the slats and see Booth, and that's when this fellow by the name of Boston Corbett from Boston, what part of Boston? Beacon Hill, when he says that God told me to shoot him, and he shoots and paralyzes and mortally wounds John Wilkes Booth on April 26, 1865. In the meantime, the other conspirators are all captured. Davy Harold is captured with Booth. Atzerodt is captured up in Germantown, Maryland, not far from where we're going to go to Buca de Beppo on Monday night. Mrs. Surratt, of course, as you saw in the movie, is arrested in her house here in Washington, not at the tavern. Okay, her house is just a few blocks up here on H Street. It's a Chinese restaurant now. And the other person that they arrest, Payne, will be arrested. You saw that in the movie also. It'll be Payne, Atzerodt, Harold, and Mrs. Surratt that will be the ones that will be hanged. And, of course, Booth will be shot and killed. Any questions?
One question. When he was over there drinking, do you think that he waited for the officer to come over and drink? And that's when he came in the front of the theater?
I never thought about that before, and I doubt it, because I don't think that he really has that much knowledge of the inner workings of Lincoln's bodyguard or whatever.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that it was typical back then. You know, they just didn't do things the way they do now. And remember, no other president had ever been assassinated, although there had been an assassination on the life of Andrew Jackson at one time.
And one other thing to keep in mind, there are two doors to that booth that you saw up there. There's an outside door and an inside door. He came through the outside door. He then took the wooden plank and used that, or the wooden piece, to block the outside door while he peered in through the inside door. Because as soon as he opens up that inside door and goes in, he's doing the deed. So he needed to have that other one set.
Well, that's why after Lincoln was shot and they realized what was going on and Booth had run across the stage, they're yelling for doctors, and they tried to get through that door and they couldn't get through because it was wedged in by that piece of wood. So they had to lift Dr. Leal up from the stage. Dr. Leal's 23 years old. He had just graduated from medical school, and of course medical school back then was nothing like it is today. You know, 23 years old, the doctor. But he's the first one there. As a consequence, he will be in charge of Lincoln the rest of the night.
And of course, you know, Mrs. Lincoln's not going to go and check the door in the inner room. No one is. Everyone else is concerned about.
So it took a while before anybody thought to
move that out of the way.
Now, when they get up there, there's a crowd up there. Even Laura Keene, the actress, who's in Our American Cousin, she gets up there. She insists that the president's head be laid on her lap. They were trying to figure out where was Lincoln hurt. They didn't see any blood. They thought, you know, all they saw with Booth was this knife. They thought he was stabbed. And then finally, Dr. Leal reaches around in the back, feeling around his scalp, and he feels a little tiny hole. He sticks his little finger in that hole.
All the way in.
He sticks his little finger in that hole. And that probably is what prolonged Lincoln's life, actually, because Lincoln had stopped breathing at that point. But when he stuck his finger in that hole and pulled it out, it allowed oxygen to get into his brain, and Lincoln now revives and is breathing again. Now, when they take him outside, they say, well, we can't take him to the White House, that'll kill him, just the journey, those 7 blocks. And there's a young soldier at home on leave over there across the street in the Peterson house. He says, bring him in here. And so they bring him into that house, and that's how Lincoln ends up in that bed in that back room. The bed was too small for a man 6'4" like Lincoln, so they had to lay him kitty corner. If you ever see any pictures, of course there are no photographs of Lincoln and his deathbed there or people in the room, but they call it the Incredible Rubber Room because there are so many, in fact there's an entire book called The Incredible Rubber Room, which just has old depictions from magazines and newspapers about what the scene was like at Lincoln's death, and they've got hundreds of people in that room. And people that were never even there, you know, were there. Famous people, Oprah's there, and, you know, you name it. So there were very few people in the room that night. Mrs. Lincoln came in a couple of times early, but she was so hysterical. Finally, Edwin Stanton says, "Get that woman out of here and don't let her back in." Mrs. Lincoln was not there when he died. His son Tad was not there, but his son Robert was there. Robert Lincoln will also be there when President Garfield was assassinated 16 years later. Robert Lincoln will also be there when President McKinley is assassinated 20 years after that in Buffalo, New York. You do not want to be president and have Robert Lincoln anywhere near you. Now, some people have asked me, are there any survivors of Abraham Lincoln? There are no survivors, no descendants of Abraham Lincoln. The last living descendant of Abraham Lincoln was the grandson of Robert Todd Lincoln. His name was Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith. He died in Vermont in 1988. So that means that it's been a good 27 years that we've got no descendants that have actual blood of Abraham Lincoln. However, I will name at least one famous person who is related to Abraham Lincoln, through marriage at least, if nothing else. And Abraham Lincoln's stepmother's name was Nancy Hanks. Excuse me, his mother's name was Nancy Hanks. His stepmother was Sarah Bush Johnson. Nancy Hanks. Do you know anybody around today who might be related to Abraham Lincoln through marriage?
Thomas.
Tom Hanks is related to Abraham Lincoln.
And it had like a whole bunch of stuff. I really cool.
Oh, you